I want to talk about an integrated approach to transport, particularly public transport, and the importance to social and economic participation. So this is probably a slightly different angle than what some of our other speakers might be talking about, although I suspect that they're equally concerned with some of the issues that are occurring, especially in the middle and outer urban areas of this great metropolis. Livability is a brand of Melbourne, and I think for many of us, livability can be translated into a whole range of things that we really value. But I'm taking it from the perspective of having a job readily accessible from home and being able to participate in social, cultural and recreational activities within your local community fosters pride, dignity, prosperity and well-being. Now for me, these are the ingredients of a good life. Unfortunately, what we are seeing is that many Melburnians are not being offered this exact opportunity of having a good life. So what do we know? Well, we know lots of things. And some of you, this story might be very close to your hearts. For others, you may have family and friends. We know that the further out you live, the poorer your access to the choice of jobs and education facilities. And this in turn affects your ability to get into having a good life. Because if you can't get a job, then of course you're then reliant upon a social service system, which can, for many people, I think is probably quite demeaning and very disturbing in terms of their future life and their children's future lives. We know that there are fewer local jobs resulting in longer travel times, higher levels of car dependency and less time with family and friends. We also know that in some instances there are working mothers who are living out in the urban areas and the growth areas who are actually choosing less skilled jobs simply to be closer to home, which does have an effect on our skill set and our productivity levels. We know that an increasing number of journey-to-work movements across the metropolitan area are cross-town movements. They are not radial movements. They are not movements which are typically in alignment with our fixed rail and tram systems. And we also know that how our economic and employment activity is structured does have significant implications for our city's productivity. So household incomes, we know, are decreasing with distance from Melbourne CBD, and you would have heard a lot of talk about the two Melbournes, the haves and the have-nots. Well, there isn't a week that doesn't go by that you don't read in the mainstream media papers that there are people out on the fringe that are suffering mortgage stress, where their household budgets are under pressure because they've had to own 2 cars to be able to access services and facilities, and they are really, for some, in quite desperate situations. We also know that higher urban density delivers more urban services, more choice in jobs, and promotes walking, cycling and public transport services. And in fact, providing a high-quality public transport service that accesses jobs, particularly clusters of jobs, and we are starting to see certain types of jobs agglomerating or clustering in certain suburban locations, and that for the people living in the outer urban areas and the growth areas, public transport is going to be critical for them to be able to access those middle suburban jobs, assuming that those jobs grow. So what do we need to do? Well, Graham and my other colleagues here will tell you lots of things of what we need to do, and I just would have hoped that there were some politicians in the room here. Are there any politicians in the room? Local government? Good on you. Thank you, Jackie. Okay, so what do we need to do? Well, firstly, we need to improve the efficiency in delivering transport infrastructure and services, reduce the costs of congestion, and think of some creative ways of pricing the transport situation. We need to substantially increase the share of travel to work, to school and other places, particularly at the local level, that are undertaken by public transport, walking and cycling. We need to sweat our existing public transport assets. We need to do it as much as possible, and to include in that improvements to timetabling, improvements to signalling systems, and prioritising buses on existing and potential high patronage usage routes. Public transport, walking and cycling produce lowest economic, social and environmental costs, more so than a motor vehicle focused policy direction. We need to set ourselves some targets and actually double the mode share within the next 20 years so that we see double the number of people using public transport, walking to local services and cycling. We all know that we need to reduce the impact of travel, particularly greenhouse gas emissions. This is our only opportunity if Melbourne has any chance of transitioning to become a low-carbon city. We need to improve our transport options, such as high-quality trunk public transport services through the middle and outer suburbs and the growth areas, and promote job growth in the activity centres and clusters so that people do have a choice of jobs, using particularly public transport to access those opportunities. This will require also using roads that have the capacity to take bus services and, wherever possible, privileging those bus movements so that they can truly connect people to work and other places in the most efficient and expeditious manner. Melbourne will become a polycentric city, and certainly Plan Melbourne is moving in that direction in terms of developing a series of clusters and activity centres that become mini CBDs serving sub-regional and suburban markets. So within that context, the connectivity between those centres, those job places, those places rich in services and facilities, is going to become increasingly important, and transport policies need to recognise that public transport has a very strong role to play in delivering those sorts of outcomes. I particularly believe that we need to provide a base public transport network aligned with the rollout of urban development in the urban growth areas. It is absolutely ludicrous to be building greenfield estates with bus stops and no buses. It is completely ludicrous. And in fact, it's socially irresponsible. Lags in the provision of reliable and frequent public transport in our urban growth areas simply leads to higher car ownership and increased pressure on household budgets. We need to integrate decent local neighbourhood public transport services to support social inclusion and the achievements of a 20-minute neighbourhood. In this local or neighbourhood context, we need to look at alternative delivery models in these growth areas using minivan taxis, community transport and other social enterprise models for people to connect to local places and facilities. You know, it's interesting to note that we accept the provision of bus services in the established middle suburbs with average densities of 10 to 12 dwellings per hectare, and yet in similar greenfield situations where in some cases the densities are higher than the middle suburbs, we argue that we can't afford those services. Why not? We sustain them in the middle suburbs where the densities are relatively low, so why are we not up for it in supporting those services in the growth areas? We need to find the right delivery model for integrating local and trunk public transport services, change the top-down approach, which is focused too much on regional services at the expense of local networks. Okay, the east-west. Now, I want to put it on the record. I am not anti the east-west, but I am anti it being the #1 transport infrastructure project. Okay? I am not anti-roads. I mean, it's ludicrous to be saying I'm anti-roads. I'm actually a very strong supporter of buses, and they just so happen to travel on roads, believe it or not. So what can we do with, is it 8 billion? Maybe it's 14 billion. We're all become a bit cynical about the cost of these projects, but can I say to you, there is too much focus on large road-based projects which swallow up large amounts, very large amounts of scarce funds and only meet the daily needs of some Melburnians. There is not equity here, there is not fairness here. Some will benefit, but many will not benefit. And I think that's part of the economic, social, environmental benefit analysis that needs to be brought into this discussion about the east-west link. We know we need a world-class bus network with an emphasis on serving the public transport needs of communities in established middle suburbs, outer suburbs and the growth areas. This bus network, I believe, can be delivered within one term of a state government. It is not difficult. Let's look at some of the arithmetic of this bus rapid transit system that I think that Melbourne is going to desperately need, and in fact needs now, not in 20 years' time. According to Bus Vic, an articulated bus can carry approximately 140 people with an on-road cost of about $750,000. This bus rapid transit system in Australia, if it was built, would be estimated to cost between $14 and $40 million. Heavy rail extensions can cost around $160 million per kilometre. They take 5 to 8 years, even longer, to be operational, and they require many millions of dollars to increase the capacity of the existing rail network. 8 new trains cost around $180 million. This same amount of money, if spent on new buses for a bus rapid transit service, can carry 2/3 more passengers in capacity terms. So you do the arithmetic. Are we getting value for money with the East-West Link? I don't believe so. Ladies and gentlemen, if we really are serious about being a world-class city, and that's my aspiration, I want Melbourne to be a world-class city. Not just livable, but a world-class city in terms of the sharing of the prosperity, the ability to get a decent education, the ability to connect easily to work and to places where I need to go. So this is all about building a network, not bits and pieces, not a bit here, not a bit there. It's about building a network. And unfortunately, we've become too road-focused in building that network. Improvements in accessibility can be made. They can be more programmatic and network changes in the arterial roads and bus services. We can provide more walking and cycling connections. And in fact, we can use that money, instead of going to the East-West Link, we can share the benefits of that $8 billion across the metropolitan area and improve the lives of people on a daily basis at a local level. And I think this is really important. Make the improvements at the local level. Yes, we can look after the trunk services at the regional and metropolitan level, but make sure we also look after the local level in terms of public transport. So my view is that we need both a top-down and a bottom-up approach within the established middle suburbs, the outer suburbs and the growth areas. That's where I believe the emphasis should be on the expenditure. The central city and the inner areas are very infrastructure rich. Not to say they're under pressure, they are under pressure, but the real deficiencies are being experienced in the rest of metropolitan Melbourne beyond the 10-kilometre mark. So to do otherwise than build a world-class public transport system runs the risk of more social exclusion for people living beyond Melbourne CBD and the inner suburbs. So as Melbourne moves well beyond the 5 million mark, and now it's estimated by the ABS that we could have up to 7.5 to 8 million people by 2050, not the 6.5 that's in the document, that as we move towards that mark, our people, our population, our communities will become increasingly dependent on an integrated, safe and efficient public transport system across the entire metropolitan area. To me, this is a fundamental ingredient of a productive, sustainable and inclusive